Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You don't forget the sound a front door makes when it slams behind you for the last time, not when you're 17, holding a threadbare backpack with 20 bucks crumpled in your pocket, and your own mother refuses to look you in the eye as she tells you, in the most rehearsed voice you've ever heard, maybe this is best for everyone. You don't forget the way the air feels on your skin in that moment either, cold, sharp, like the world itself is telling you not to come back. And you sure as hell don't forget the smirk on your older sister's face, standing in the hallway behind your mother, arms folded smug across her chest, eyes glinting with something that was never sisterly, never protective, something that felt more like victory. That's what Amanda always wanted, after all. To win. She didn't care what the game was, didn't care who she hurt, didn't care what she had to break to feel superior. She just wanted control, and she had it that day. She had been chipping away at me for years, whispering little things into Mom's ear when I wasn't in the room, twisting innocent mistakes into character flaws, rewriting reality so slowly and so subtly that by the time I realized what she was doing, it was too late to defend myself. She knew exactly how to weaponize her charm, how to perform concern while loading every sentence with quiet poison. And my mother, too exhausted or too blind or too damn weak to question anything, just nodded along, feeding off Amanda's lies like they were truth. I wasn't a perfect teenager, who is? I was moody, restless, and too proud for my own good sometimes. I talked back when I should have stayed quiet, pushed boundaries when I should have held the line. But I didn't deserve what happened that day, and I didn't deserve to be treated like garbage that someone finally decided to drag out to the curb. Amanda had spent weeks building up her little campaign, catching me sneaking out to a party once, framing it like I was some delinquent, exaggerating my missed curfew into tales of recklessness and danger, even going so far as to plant a vape pen in my backpack and discover it during a fake cleaning spree. She staged a scene so perfectly that by the time my mother called me downstairs for the talk, the decision had already been made. I wasn't being disciplined, I was being erased. The conversation was barely a conversation. It was more like a scripted monologue from a woman who'd stopped being my mother the second Amanda decided she wanted me gone. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded in front of her like she was about to offer me a business deal instead of an ultimatum. "You're not making this a home anymore," she said flatly. "You're not following the rules, you're creating tension, and frankly, Amanda shouldn't have to live in a toxic environment." Toxic. That was the word she used, as if I was a chemical spill, a hazard to be cleaned up, something that would stain the furniture if not handled quickly. I looked at Amanda then, standing smugly in the corner, and I remember thinking how much she must have rehearsed this moment in her head, how many times she dreamed of pushing me out and having the house to herself again. She didn't even try to look sorry. In fact, when I started crying real, shaking tears that I tried to choke back, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "God, don't make this dramatic." There was no fight left in me. I packed my bag in silence, grabbing what little I could carry, some clothes, a few notebooks, a toothbrush, and a picture of my dad from before he died, the only person in that house who'd ever really seen me. I walked out the front door without another word, and the only sound behind me was Amanda's heels clicking down the hallway like punctuation at the end of a cruel sentence. That night, I slept in the back seat of my friend's car. No heater, no blanket, just my jacket pulled tight around my body and the bitter realization that I'd been thrown away like I was nothing. I stared at the roof of that car for hours, thinking about all the moments I had begged for my mother's approval, all the times I'd tried to connect with Amanda, all the years I had convinced myself that family meant something more than blood and proximity. But somewhere around dawn, as my fingers went numb and my tears dried on my cheeks, something inside me shifted. It wasn't clarity, not yet. It wasn't even anger, not the kind that explodes. It was quieter, colder, something steelier. I realized I'd been handed a choice, not one I asked for, not one I wanted, but a choice all the same. I could beg to be let back in, try to explain myself to people who never truly listened, or I could build something so far beyond their understanding that one day they'd choke on their assumptions. I didn't know then how long it would take. I didn't know the path would be brutal, thankless, and paved with moments that nearly broke me. But I knew this. I would never let them see me crawl. I swore I'd never come crawling back. And I didn't. People talk about rock bottom like it's a single moment, like there's some obvious point where everything breaks and you just know you've hit it. But let me tell you something honest, it's not always that clean. Sometimes it's a slow slide down a slope you didn't even realize you were on until you wake up in the middle of the night in the back seat of your friend's car, shivering, hungry, and wondering if this is really going to be your life now. I didn't have a plan back then, just a few changes of clothes in a grocery bag, a dying flip phone, and a notebook full of half-written ideas that felt more like fantasies than future steps. Every morning I'd wash up in gas station bathrooms. Every afternoon I'd bounce between temporary jobs, barista, receptionist, cashier, babysitter, anything to keep a few bucks in my pocket and food in my stomach. The first year was a blur of survival. I'd pick up shifts wherever I could, sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs just to afford a room in someone's basement or a shared bed in a rundown hostel. I learned how to stretch $10 into 3 meals and how to pretend like everything was fine when my body was aching from exhaustion. I didn't tell anyone where I came from, didn't talk about Amanda, didn't mention the way my mother had looked through me like I was a stranger. I carried that shame around like an anchor, thinking if I worked hard enough, maybe one day it wouldn't define me anymore. And then, somehow, it happened. Something shifted, something small, but it cracked the shell I'd been living in. I landed a temp job at a real estate office downtown, nothing fancy, just answering phones, filing paperwork, making coffee runs, but it paid better than anything I'd done so far, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely invisible. The people in that office wore power like perfume, crisp suits, sharp smiles, and voices that carried authority, and at first, I just watched them from a distance, soaking in everything I could like a sponge. I'd listened to how they negotiated deals, how they talked about market trends, how they closed sales with a single sentence and walked out the door like kings. I didn't have a business degree or a family safety net, but I had something they didn't: hunger. The kind that keeps you awake at night and makes you look at every opportunity like it might be your last. So I started staying late after my shifts, asking questions, reading every brochure, studying every listing, and eventually, one of the junior agents, Sasha, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-bullshit attitude, took notice. She offered to mentor me unofficially, taught me the basics of real estate investing, how to spot undervalued properties, how to read between the lines of a deal. I'll never forget what she said to me one night over takeout in the break room. "No one's coming to save you, kid. You build your own damn ladder." And I did. Within 2 years, I had enough saved to make a down payment on a tiny foreclosure property in a rough neighborhood. I bought it under a business name, Lighthouse Holdings, because I wanted to keep my identity off the radar, to keep my success quiet while I kept building in the shadows. I renovated that first property myself, plastering walls, laying tile, repainting cabinets, and flipped it within 6 months for double what I paid. From there, it became an obsession. Every dollar I made went into the next investment, then the next, then the next. I wasn't chasing wealth for the sake of it. I was chasing security, chasing freedom, chasing the ability to walk into any room and know I didn't need a damn thing from anyone. Eventually, Lighthouse Holdings became more than just a shell name. It became my real identity, the face I used in every deal, the mask that let me operate without the weight of my past dragging behind me. By 25, I owned 4 properties. By 27, I had passive income coming in from multiple rentals. By 30, I had built a small but solid real estate portfolio, quietly buying up properties in neighborhoods that Amanda would never even glance at because she was too busy chasing status to understand how real wealth actually worked. And not once, through all those years of growth, risk, struggle, and rising, I ever told them a single word. They still thought I was drifting somewhere on the edge of life, working retail or waiting tables, probably pitiful and directionless. Amanda still liked to bring up how I'd never had what it took, and my mother still nodded politely, not knowing the woman they threw out with $20 had turned it into a foundation they'd never even see coming. Have you ever been made to feel worthless by your own family only to prove them wrong later? What did that moment feel like when you finally realized they no longer held power over your future? Tell me in the comments, because let me tell you, there's nothing like the silence that follows when the people who doubted you realize you've outgrown everything they ever used to control you. By 30, I owned more than they'd ever imagine. And not once did I tell them a damn thing. It came in the form of a pale cream envelope, the kind Amanda probably picked out from some overpriced boutique stationer just to show off her taste in paper like it meant something deeper about her soul. My name was written in that overly elegant cursive she always used when she wanted to pretend she was more refined than the rest of us, the kind of handwriting that tried too hard to look effortless, but screamed performance from every swirling loop. I held it in my hand for a long moment, just staring at it like it might burn me, wondering if she'd finally grown a conscience or if this was just another one of her carefully staged performances with a trap hidden behind every ribbon and bow. Inside was the invitation to Christmas dinner, warmly worded, full of phrases like reconnecting, healing past wounds, and celebrating family. But even through the neatly typed sentences and polite tone, I could hear her voice underneath it all, that sing-song condescension she always used when she was pretending to be generous, but couldn't quite hide the gleam of superiority in her words. She even signed it, Love, Amanda, as if the word ever meant anything coming from her mouth. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, the invitation laying there like a ticking bomb, half expecting the damn thing to explode into glitter and smugness. Part of me wanted to rip it in half without a second thought, throw it in the trash with the rest of the past she'd discarded like I was just another old toy she outgrew. But another part of me, the colder, sharper, more deliberate part, felt something different rise inside. It wasn't curiosity, and it wasn't forgiveness. It was strategy. Because if Amanda was calling me back into her spotlight, there was a reason. And I wanted to know what the hell she thought she was playing at. I already knew it wasn't about family. Amanda didn't do things without a motive. She didn't extend olive branches without planning to snap them in half later and act surprised when the pieces hit the ground. I could smell the manipulation through the ink, feel the weight of whatever game she thought she was about to win, and I knew, deep down in my bones, that this wasn't a dinner. It was a stage. And she was trying to cast me in the role of the forgotten little sister, the one who never made anything of herself, the one who would show up small and timid and grateful to be invited, just so she could perform her charity act in front of an audience. But what Amanda didn't know was that I had no interest in playing the part she had written for me. I wasn't coming back to beg for scraps of kindness or pretend the past hadn't happened. I wasn't walking into her house to cry over turkey and pretend our family wasn't a burned-out shell held together by holiday decor and fake smiles. I was going for one reason and one reason only, to look her in the eye and see exactly what she'd become while I'd been building something real. I wanted to see the cracks she was hiding under the surface, to watch the mask slip just slightly, to hear her voice tremble when she realized I wasn't who she remembered. So I said yes. I replied with a short note, nothing more than a polite acceptance, no emotion, no hint of the storm brewing beneath my calm words. I picked out my outfit with intention, something modest, quiet, almost forgettable. A simple sweater, jeans, clean shoes. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive. I wanted to walk in exactly the way they remembered me, quiet, small, unassuming. Because people like Amanda only see what they want to see, and they never look closely enough to notice when the quiet ones are holding the sharpest knives. On Christmas Eve, I pulled into the driveway of the house I hadn't set foot in since the day I was thrown out. The windows glowed with warm light, the porch was lined with garlands, and the door was wide open, waiting. I took a long breath, steadied my hands, and stepped out of my car, walking toward that house not as the lost girl they discarded, but as the woman they never saw coming. I rang the bell with steady fingers, smiled politely when Amanda opened the door with her usual performative grace, and nodded as if nothing had ever happened between us. She welcomed me in with a voice full of fake warmth, and I stepped into the familiar hallway with its polished floors and the faint scent of cinnamon candles covering something much colder underneath. I took my seat at the table, listened to the small talk, answered their questions with quiet civility, and watched Amanda carefully, watching me, trying to figure out if I was still the girl she had destroyed years ago. She didn't know that I had already won before I even stepped foot inside. I went, dressed simple, quiet, invisible. Just how they remembered me. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The thing about family dinners, especially the kind where old wounds are dressed up with place settings and holiday centerpieces, is that the tension never really hides, it just wears a better outfit. The table was set with Amanda's usual flair, matching napkin rings, polished silverware, and centerpieces that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. Everything looked perfect on the surface, but underneath the sparkle and spice-scented candles was that same old bitterness wrapped in ribbon and forced smiles. I sat there quietly, watching her flutter between guests with a hostess smile glued to her face, pouring wine like she was auditioning for some suburban lifestyle magazine. And I knew it wouldn't be long before she started chipping away at me in the way only Amanda knew how, smiling sweetly while aiming for the throat. Dinner started with clinking glasses and hollow laughter, a dozen people pretending to enjoy each other's company while side-eyeing second helpings and trying to one-up each other's small talk. Amanda's husband Brad was already on his second glass of wine before the ham was served, trying to sound important by dropping buzzwords about some investment firm he'd barely worked for. My mother kept glancing my way with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if she wasn't sure if I was going to make a scene or disappear mid-meal like a ghost of Christmas past. The food was good, too good, actually rich, seasoned, and expensive, the kind of dishes meant to impress more than nourish. It all felt so performative, like the whole dinner had been choreographed with the sole purpose of proving that Amanda had won the game she thought we were playing. The first few jabs were light and wrapped in silk, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Amanda commented on how some people still dress so modestly these days, with a glance in my direction, her smile as sharp as a blade. Then she praised her own recent accomplishments a little too loudly, just in case I'd forgotten how successful she'd become: real estate, fashion, social circles, as if any of it meant more than the chairs we were sitting on. I kept my face still, nodded politely, said thank you and complimented, and watched the room like a chessboard, letting her believe I was still playing checkers. Then came the main course, and with it, Amanda's favorite game, passive-aggressive dinner theater. She leaned back in her chair, swirling wine in her glass, and tilted her head with that rehearsed expression of casual superiority she'd perfected over the years. She was building up to something, I could feel it in the air, and I knew the moment she opened her mouth that the gloves were coming off. You know, she said, her voice dripping with condescension masked as curiosity, I always find it so interesting how people take such different paths in life. Some of us work hard, build something solid, stay focused, and others just sort of drift. The sentence hung in the air like smoke, and though no one said anything right away, every head at the table turned slightly in my direction, their eyes flickering with awkward curiosity. Amanda smiled wider, pretending to sip her wine while watching me from the rim of her glass. I mean, she continued, as if she hadn't already made her point, not everyone is cut out for success. Some people just, well, they stay stuck. But hey, not everyone's meant to thrive, right? I stayed silent, letting her dig the hole a little deeper, my hands still resting gently on my lap, my expression unreadable. She wasn't done though, of course not. Amanda never stopped when she had a captive audience. At least, she said with a little laugh, loud enough for the whole table to hear, I'm not broke like some people at this table. It was like someone had slammed a door in the middle of dinner. The air shifted instantly. Forks paused mid-bite, wine glasses lowered, and all conversation stopped cold. You could hear the faint clink of a spoon touching the edge of a plate somewhere in the distance, but nothing else. Every pair of eyes turned toward me in slow, stunned silence, waiting to see if I'd laugh it off, get up and leave, or maybe cry into my mashed potatoes. Amanda sat there smug and proud, thinking she'd finally landed the perfect blow, the grand finale of her carefully orchestrated performance. I looked at her for a long second, then glanced around the table, making eye contact with each guest slowly. My mother, Brad, a few cousins, even the neighbor Amanda had invited to show off her social reach. Then I smiled, not forced, not polite, but calm and unshaken. It wasn't the smile of someone insulted. It was the smile of someone holding a secret so heavy it could snap a person in half if dropped without warning. Is that what you think? I asked, my voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence like a razor sliding through silk. Amanda blinked, caught off guard by the ease in my tone, the lack of flinch or fury. She nodded smugly, still assuming she had the upper hand. Well, you said it yourself, you've always struggled to find your place. I nodded once, leaned back slightly in my chair, and reached into my purse. Then I pulled out the paperwork from my purse and placed it gently on the table. The rustle of the paper against the tablecloth was the only sound in the room as I laid down the envelope, letting it sit there like a quiet bomb no one saw coming, the edges crisp and clean. The contents heavier than any insult Amanda could have ever hurled across that over-decorated dinner table. I didn't rush to speak, didn't raise my voice or try to make a scene. I just sat back in my chair and looked at her, watching the confident curve of her smirk start to falter as the silence stretched too long and her little audience waited for whatever was about to drop. Amanda reached for her wine again, trying to maintain her composure, but her hand shook slightly, and for the first time in the entire evening, she didn't look quite so certain. "Go ahead," I said, nodding at the envelope with a smile that was sharper than anything she'd ever thrown at me. "Open it. It's addressed to you." With a skeptical glance and an eye roll meant to cover the twitch of nervous curiosity, she slid her perfectly manicured fingers under the flap and pulled out the stack of documents, her lips pressing into a thin line as her eyes scanned the first page. And that's when the color started to drain from her face, slow and undeniable, like someone had turned off the lights behind her eyes and she didn't know how to switch them back on. She looked up at me, confused, then down again, reading faster now, flipping through the pages as if she might find a different ending buried somewhere in the legal language. But the truth was right there, black and white, notarized, signed, and sealed, the house we were all sitting in, the one Amanda bragged about hosting in every holiday season, the one she loved to parade as proof of her suburban success, had been sold quietly last year by the original owner. And the new owner, the name printed clearly across the deed, was Lighthouse Holdings, LLC. That's me. The silence turned colder, heavier, thicker with every second that passed. My mother blinked slowly, her mouth slightly open, looking from Amanda to me and back again like her brain couldn't connect the dots. Brad, Amanda's smug little husband, leaned in to read over her shoulder, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief to pure panic in less than 10 seconds. He looked at me like I'd just kicked over the foundation of his carefully constructed life and shown him the cracks he'd been pretending weren't there all along. "I bought the house from the landlord last year," I said calmly, tapping the edge of my wine glass. "It was a quiet deal. Private. But I've been the legal owner since March. You've been paying rent to Lighthouse Holdings, which is, of course, me." Amanda's mouth opened, then closed again without sound. For once in her life, she didn't have a comeback, no quick jab or sarcastic quip to salvage the moment. Her eyes were wide now, darting between the paperwork and my face, trying to find a loophole, a mistake, anything that would restore the illusion she had clung to so tightly for so long. But there was nothing left to hold on to. It was real, it was legal, and it was done. "I've been collecting rent from this household for 9 months now," I added, almost as an afterthought, though I knew it would land like a punch to the gut. "You never thought to ask who is behind the company. You just signed the checks, Amanda." Brad stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back with a loud scrape against the hardwood floor. He looked like he might vomit or run or both. "You mean to tell me we've been paying her?" he asked, pointing at me with a mix of confusion and rage, as if I'd pulled some kind of trick on them instead of simply outsmarting the people who once discarded me like I was disposable. "And not just this house," I continued, my voice still soft but unwavering, each word hitting harder than the last. "You know those office units you lease for your side business, Brad? 3 of those belong to Lighthouse Holdings, too. You've been cutting checks to me there as well." The silence that followed was the kind you can feel pressing against your skin, thick with disbelief and humiliation. Amanda was staring at the table now, lips trembling, her carefully curated holiday facade crumbling in front of everyone she'd worked so hard to impress. I didn't gloat, didn't stand up and shout my victory. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife just a little deeper, one of Amanda's friends, some overly Botoxed woman with a pearl necklace and a glass of Chardonnay, whispered, "Wait, so you're her landlord?" Like it was the most delicious scandal she'd ever heard. That was when Amanda's pride finally cracked, and the room watched it happen in real time, the red blooming on her cheeks, the tremble in her jaw, the desperate search in her eyes for some way to take it all back. But there was nothing left to claw at. The illusion was shattered, and I hadn't even raised my voice. The whispers grew louder, the stares more curious, and Amanda shrank smaller in her chair, suddenly not the queen of her castle, but just another tenant on a lease she hadn't even read carefully enough to understand. She called me broke. But I was the damn landlord. Long after the guests had left, their shallow goodbyes echoing off the hallway walls like hollow promises, I sat alone in the quiet of Amanda's dining room, the room that wasn't hers anymore, not legally, not truly, not in any meaningful way. The flickering candles had burned low, the scent of roasted meat and wine still lingered in the air, but the warmth of the evening had long since drained from the walls. What was left behind was that heavy, undeniable silence that only settles after a storm, a silence that doesn't offer comfort, only clarity. I looked at the papers still lying on the table, Amanda's discarded wine glass tipped sideways, a smear of lipstick bleeding along the rim like an afterthought, and I wondered, for the first time that night, what revenge really means when it's finally yours to hold. I had spent so many years dreaming of this moment, shaping it in my mind like clay, molding it into a scene that would finally balance the scales between us. I imagined Amanda's humiliation, the shock in her eyes, the way she'd choke on her own pride when she realized the little sister she threw out like trash had become the very foundation beneath her feet. And I had it. I had every ounce of satisfaction I'd ever fantasized about, handed to me not through rage or violence, but through calm, quiet, strategic triumph. I had exposed her carefully curated image in front of everyone she sought to impress, and I didn't have to raise my voice to do it. But as I sat there in that hollow victory, a strange feeling settled in the back of my throat. Not regret exactly, but something murkier, harder to name. It wasn't guilt for what I'd done. It was something deeper, something older, something tied to a version of me that still lived in that 17-year-old girl with a backpack and $20. That girl hadn't wanted revenge. She'd just wanted to be seen, to be safe, to be loved without conditions or competition. And now, sitting in a house I legally owned, watching Amanda shrink under the weight of her own arrogance, I realized that what I'd always wanted wasn't to destroy her, it was to be free of her. Later that night, I returned home and pulled out an old box from the back of my closet, one I hadn't touched in years, one filled with fragments of a life I'd worked hard to outgrow, but never quite managed to discard. Inside were old photos, a few childhood drawings, and, folded in a brittle, yellowing envelope, a letter from my father. I'd found it years ago, tucked inside an old book he'd once read to me, but at the time, I hadn't been ready to read it. That night, something told me it was time. His handwriting was shaky, uneven, the ink slightly faded, but the words were unmistakably his. He'd written it during the final months of his life, when cancer had hollowed out most of his strength, but not his honesty. He wrote about his regrets, about the cracks in our family, about Amanda's jealousy and my mother's indifference. But most of all, he wrote about me. He said he saw me, truly saw me, even when no one else did. He apologized for not being there to protect me, and he ended with a line that hit harder than anything Amanda had ever said. Don't become like them. Build your world, but don't build it on bitterness. You deserve better than that. I held that letter in my hands for a long time, tears tracing silent lines down my cheeks, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood what kind of power I really held. Yes, I could evict Amanda. I could pull the rug out from under her life, expose every financial lie she'd ever told, seize her assets, and turn her world upside down just like she once did to mine. I could destroy her with a flick of my pen, and no one would question me. But I didn't want to be the kind of person who needed destruction to feel whole. I didn't want my victory to taste like spite. So instead, I made a different choice. I kept the property, of course, ownership was non-negotiable. But I didn't kick her out, didn't make a scene, didn't leave her sobbing in the driveway with boxes stacked on the curb. I raised the rent quietly, by enough to sting, by enough to remind her every month who really held the reins, but not so much that it drove her into ruin. And every extra dollar I made from that increase? I donated it to the same women's shelter that once gave me a cot, a hot meal, and a sliver of dignity when no one else would. It wasn't about kindness. It wasn't forgiveness. It was about rewriting the narrative of my own life, about choosing to stand tall without stepping on anyone's neck. I didn't do it for Amanda. I did it for the girl I used to be, for the woman I had become, for every person who's ever been cast aside and told they'd never rise. Because I did rise. I rose so quietly, so steadily, so completely, that by the time they noticed me, I was already standing on ground they thought belonged to them. Some people destroy you and still expect kindness. But I've learned this: true power is knowing you could crush them and choosing not to. Not because they deserve mercy, but because you've already won.